The man was found at dawn, halfway up the 199 steps that climb from the old town of Whitby to the ruined abbey on the headland above. He lay face down on the wet stone, his arms flung wide as though he had tried to embrace the earth in his final moment. A fisherman named Caleb Drummond discovered him at 5:30, climbing in the grey half-light to check the weather from the churchyard before taking his coble out to the lobster pots. Drummond, a man of 60 who had seen drownings and storms and the quiet violence the sea does to the careless, knew death when he saw it. He did not touch the body. He descended the steps, walked to the police station on Spring Hill, and reported what he had found in the flat, matter-of-fact voice of a man for whom tragedy was simply another tide to be navigated. I know all of this because I, Captain Arthur Hastings, arrived in Whitby 2 days later with Hercule Poirot, and Caleb Drummond was the first person we interviewed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We were not in Whitby by chance. Poirot had received a telephone call on a Saturday evening. An unusual occurrence, as my friend regarded the telephone with the same suspicion he reserved for uneven curtains and English cooking. The call came from Inspector Hadley of the North Riding Constabulary, a man Poirot had assisted once before in a matter involving a poisoned racehorse in Thirsk. "Monsieur Poirot," Hadley had said. I could hear his Yorkshire vowels even from across the room. "I've got a death in Whitby that doesn't sit right. Local doctor says heart failure. The family says murder. And the dead man left a letter that's got everyone in the town looking over their shoulders." Poirot, who had been polishing a pair of cufflinks with the concentration of a diamond cutter, set them down. "A letter, Inspector. Sealed envelope, found in his coat pocket. Addressed to the police, written the day before he died. Says, and I'm reading directly here, if I am found dead, it will not be from natural causes. Look to those who stand to inherit what I have built. One of them has already tried once. They will try again. I do not know which one. God forgive them. God forgive me. Signed, Magnus Thorne." "Magnus Thorne," Poirot repeated. "The name is not familiar to me." "Wouldn't be, unless you follow the jet trade. Thorne was the biggest dealer in Whitby jet. You know, the black stone they carve into jewellery. Made a fortune during the Victorian mourning craze, when every widow in England wanted jet beads. The family's been in the trade for generations. Magnus was the last of the line, in a manner of speaking. 71 years old, widowed, 3 grown children and a business worth, well, the estimates vary, but we're talking considerable money. And the doctor's opinion? Dr. Pemberton, he's been the town physician for decades, says Magnus had a weak heart. Says the climb up those steps in the cold would have been enough to finish him. But the letter, Monsieur Poirot, the letter changes everything." Poirot agreed. "We caught the morning train from King's Cross. The journey north was long, and for Poirot, an exercise in sustained martyrdom. He endured the swaying of the carriages with tight-lipped forbearance, declined the dining car's offering of steak and kidney pie with a shudder that bordered on the theatrical, and spent much of the journey reading a slim volume on the history of Whitby jet that he had procured from a bookshop near the station. "Fascinating, Hastings," he murmured at one point, tapping the page. "Whitby jet is not truly a gemstone at all. It is fossilized wood, the remains of ancient trees, compressed over millions of years into a substance harder than coal and blacker than midnight. The Romans prized it. The Victorians worshipped it. Queen Victoria herself decreed that only jet could be worn at court during mourning." "Very interesting," I said, though I confess my mind was more occupied with the prospect of the case ahead. "It is more than interesting, mon ami. It is instructive. A substance that appears to be one thing, a precious stone, but is in truth something else entirely. Dead wood dressed in beauty. Remember this. In Whitby, things are not always what they seem." We arrived in the late afternoon, stepping onto a platform buffeted by a wind that carried the salt tang of the North Sea and the faint, persistent smell of smoked fish. Inspector Hadley met us in a battered police motor car, his ruddy face set in the expression of a man who has a problem and knows it. The drive into Whitby itself was dramatic. The road descended sharply, and the town revealed itself in layers. First the newer hotels and boarding houses of the West Cliff, then the harbour below where fishing cobbles and small cargo vessels clustered around the quays, and beyond, on the far side of the River Esk, the older east side, a tumble of red-roofed cottages climbing steeply toward the headland where the ruined abbey stood against a sky the colour of bruised pewter. And over everything, threading through the streets and curling around the harbour like a living thing, was the fog. Not a London fog, not that yellow sulphurous blanket I knew so well. This was a sea fog, white and cold, rolling in from the North Sea in slow, deliberate waves. It muffled sound, it blurred edges, it transformed the familiar into the strange turning lampposts, into spectres and fishing nets, into webs spun by some enormous, patient spider. "The fog has been like this for 3 days, Hadley said, steering carefully through streets that seemed to dissolve into white nothingness at every turning. Came in the night, Magnus Thorne died. Hasn't lifted since. The fishermen won't go out. They say it's unnatural." "Unnatural?" I said. "Superstitious lot, fishermen. They say the fog came for Thorne, that it's waiting for something before it leaves." Poirot, wedged into the back seat with his overcoat buttoned to the chin and his hat pulled low against the damp he so despised, made no comment, but his eyes, bright as a robin's, were taking in everything: the fog, the harbour, the looming shadow of the abbey on the cliff above, with the unblinking attention of a man who has already begun to work. Our lodgings were at the Royal Hotel on the West Cliff, a respectable establishment that offered, Hadley assured us, hot water and tolerable food. Poirot inspected his room with the thoroughness of a health inspector, pronounced the bed adequate and the bathroom merely survivable, and then insisted we proceed immediately to view the scene. The 199 steps. Even in better weather, the climb would have been formidable. The steps, ancient, worn smooth by centuries of feet, ascended from Church Street on the east side, winding steeply upward through a passage flanked by old gravestones and the dark bulk of St. Mary's Church. In the fog, with the failing light of late afternoon and the wet stone gleaming treacherously, it was a place designed to unsettle. Poirot, who regarded physical exertion with the same enthusiasm he reserved for unmatched socks, climbed slowly, pausing every 20 steps to catch his breath and to examine the stonework. "Here," said Hadley, stopping at approximately the 100th step. "This is where Drummond found him." The step was unremarkable, wider than some, narrower than others, flanked by a low stone wall on one side and a grassy bank studded with old headstones on the other. There was nothing to indicate that a man had died here. No chalk outline, no police tape, just wet stone and fog and the distant cry of gulls. The body was face down, Hadley continued, arms extended, no visible wounds, no signs of a struggle. His clothes were not disordered. His wallet was in his pocket, untouched. The only unusual thing was his expression. His expression. Peaceful, almost smiling. Dr. Pemberton said that was consistent with cardiac arrest. Sometimes the face relaxes, but it struck me as odd, given the letter. If a man fears for his life, if he believes someone is trying to kill him, does he die with a smile on his face? Poirot crouched, with some difficulty and a small groan of protest from his knees, and examined the step where the body had lain. He ran his fingers along the stone, brought them to his nose, then examined the wall, the grass, the adjacent headstones. He was quiet for a long time. "What was Magnus Thorne doing on these steps at such an hour?" he asked at last. "That's the question, isn't it? His house is on Church Street at the bottom. His workshop is on Sandgate. There's no reason for a man of 71 with a weak heart to be climbing these steps before dawn, in fog, alone." Unless he was meeting someone, I said. Or fleeing from someone, Poirot murmured. He straightened, wincing. Inspector, I should like to see the letter, and then I should like to meet the family. The Thorne residence occupied a commanding position on Church Street, that ancient cobbled lane at the foot of the steps. It was a handsome house of dark stone, 4 stories tall, with bay windows that overlooked the harbour, and a front door painted the deep black of Whitby jet. The house had been in the Thorne family for over a century, and it wore its age with the defiant dignity of a building that has weathered worse than fog. Inside, the atmosphere was one of mourning that had not yet found its rhythm. The curtains were drawn. A fire burned low in the parlour grate, doing little to dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. And gathered in the parlour, waiting for us with varying degrees of willingness, were the 3 surviving Thorne children. I say children, but none of them were young. Edgar Thorne, the eldest at 47, stood by the mantelpiece with the rigid posture of a man accustomed to authority. He had inherited his father's broad frame and heavy jaw, but none, I suspected, of his subtlety. Edgar managed the family's jet workshop, the cutting, carving, and polishing operation on Sandgate, and had done so for 20 years. His hands, I noticed, bore the permanent dark staining of a man who worked with jet, the fossilized wood leaving its mark on those who handled it. "We appreciate you coming, Monsieur Poirot," he said, though his tone suggested he appreciated it rather less than his words implied. "Though I confess I think it's unnecessary. Father had a bad heart. He died on those damned steps. It's a tragedy, not a mystery." "And the letter?" Poirot asked mildly. Edgar's jaw tightened. Father was not himself in his final weeks. He was anxious, suspicious, seeing threats where none existed. The letter is the product of an old man's paranoia. Nothing more. The second child was Miriam Thorne, Mrs. Miriam Haldane as she had become, a woman of 43 whose beauty had aged into something more interesting than prettiness. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, her face lean and watchful, her manner that of someone who has learned to guard her words. She had married a solicitor from Scarborough, one Thomas Haldane, who sat beside her now. A thin, precise man with the permanently worried expression of someone who sees problems before they exist and bills them accordingly. Miriam said little, but what she said carried weight. Father was not paranoid, Edgar. He was frightened. There's a difference. "Frightened of what?" Edgar demanded. "Of one of us." She said it flatly, without drama, and the words landed like a slap. The third child, and the one who interested me most, though I could not have said why, was the youngest, Owen Thorne, aged 35. He was unlike his siblings in almost every respect. Where Edgar was solid and blunt and Miriam was guarded, Owen was mercurial. Restless, quick-eyed, with the nervous energy of a man who never quite fits in the space he occupies. He had left Whitby at 20 to pursue a career as a painter in London, had achieved moderate success, and returned home 6 months ago under circumstances that, I gathered, were not entirely voluntary. "The prodigal son," he said, catching my gaze with a sardonic smile. "Come home to roost, or to be suspected of murder, depending on one's perspective." "No one is suspected of anything at present," Poirot said. "I am here to establish the facts. Nothing more." "The facts?" Owen laughed softly. "Facts in this town are like the fog, Monsieur Poirot. They shift, they obscure, and by the time you think you can see through them, you've already walked off the edge of the cliff." It was a theatrical remark, but it stayed with me. Poirot began, as was his custom, by asking each of them to account for their movements on the night Magnus Thorne died. Edgar had been at his home on Flowergate, the street running parallel to the harbour on the west side, with his wife, Dorothy, and had retired early. He claimed to have heard nothing and known nothing until Hadley's constable knocked on his door at 7 in the morning. Miriam and Thomas Haldane had been staying at the Royal Hotel, the very hotel where Poirot and I were now lodged, having arrived from Scarborough 2 days previously at Magnus's invitation. They had dined at the hotel and retired at 10. Thomas, a light sleeper, claimed to have heard the foghorns throughout the night, but nothing else. Owen had been at the family house on Church Street. He had been living there since his return to Whitby. He said he had gone to bed at 11, read for an hour, and slept until morning. He had not heard his father leave the house, though his room was on the 3rd floor and the front door was 2 stories below. "Your father left the house during the night," Poirot said. "In fog, in cold, to climb 199 steps. And none of you heard him go." "The house is solidly built," Edgar said, "and father was a quiet man. A quiet man who feared for his life. Such a man does not typically go walking at dawn without reason." "Unless the reason was inside his own head," Edgar countered. "As I said, paranoia." Poirot let this pass. He moved instead to the question of inheritance. The atmosphere in the parlor, already tense, became electric. "Father's will is straightforward," Edgar said too quickly. "The business, the workshop, the inventory, the trading contracts, comes to me. The house and personal effects are divided equally among the 3 of us. There's also a sum of money, I believe around £12,000, held in trust." "12,000? Miriam's voice was sharp. "Father told me it was closer to 20. Then father was mistaken, or exaggerating. You know how he was with numbers. I know how you are with numbers, Edgar." The siblings glared at each other with the practiced hostility of people who have been arguing about the same things for decades. Thomas Haldane cleared his throat. "If I may, Monsieur Poirot. As the family's solicitor? Well, as Miriam's husband and a solicitor. I should point out that the will was last revised 4 months ago. At that time, Magnus made a significant change." "What change?" "He added a codicil, a provision that if any beneficiary were found to have acted against the interests of the family business, and I quote, through fraud, theft, or material deception, their share would be forfeit and redistributed among the remaining heirs." The silence that followed was suffocating. Edgar's face had gone the color of old brick. Owen's sardonic smile had vanished. Only Miriam remained composed, though I noticed her fingers were laced so tightly in her lap that the knuckles were white. "Father never mentioned this to me," Edgar said. "He instructed me, through correspondence, to prepare the codicil and file it with his London solicitors. Not with the family firm in Scarborough. He wanted it kept confidential." "Kept confidential from whom?" Edgar's voice was rising. "From everyone, until such time as it became relevant." Poirot absorbed all of this with his characteristic stillness, the stillness of a cat watching a mousehole, patient and absolute. "I should like," he said, "to see the workshop." The Thorn workshop occupied a long, low building on Sandgate, one of the narrow streets running between Church Street and the harbour. From the outside it was unremarkable. A stone frontage with small windows and a door that had been painted and repainted so many times it had acquired the lumpy texture of geological strata. Inside, it was extraordinary. The workshop was a single vast room, its ceiling blackened by decades of coal dust and the fine particulate thrown off by jet cutting. Workbenches lined the walls, each equipped with lathes, grinders, and polishing wheels. Racks of finished pieces, brooches, necklaces, earrings, crosses, mourning bracelets, gleamed under gas lamps like captured fragments of night. The air smelled of mineral dust and linseed oil, and beneath it, something older. The ancient, earthy scent of the jet itself, wood fossilized over 180 million years, older than the dinosaurs, old as grief. Edgar led us through the workshop with the proprietorial confidence of a man on his own territory. "We employ 11 craftsmen," he said. "Down from 30 in grandfather's day, but the trade has contracted. Jet isn't fashionable the way it was. We survive on commissions, exports to America, and the tourist trade. Your father disagreed with your management of the business? Poirot asked. Edgar stiffened. We had differences. Father was traditional. He wanted to keep doing things the old way. Hand-cutting, small batches, the artisan approach. I've been trying to modernize, mechanize certain processes, reduce costs, increase output. And these differences, they were the cause of the codicil? I don't know what caused the bloody codicil, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't know it existed until 10 minutes ago. Poirot moved slowly through the workshop, examining tools, running his fingers along surfaces, pausing to study certain objects with the intense concentration of a man reading a foreign text. He stopped at a bench near the back of the room, a bench that was tidier than the others, its tools arranged with particular care, its surface scrubbed clean. Whose bench is this? Father's, Edgar said. He still came in most days, couldn't stay away. He'd sit here for hours, carving. Said it kept his hands steady and his mind clear. Poirot opened the drawers beneath the bench, one by one. Files, chisels, polishing cloths, fragments of raw jet, sketches on yellowed paper. In the last drawer, beneath a fold of chamois leather, he found something that made him pause. A small glass bottle, unlabeled, containing approximately an inch of amber liquid. He held it up. What is this? Edgar frowned. I've never seen it before. Could be linseed oil. We use it for finishing. Poirot unstopped the bottle and raised it carefully toward his nose. One brief inhalation. He replaced the stopper immediately, his expression unreadable. This is not linseed oil, he said quietly. What is it then? That, Monsieur Thorne, is something I shall need to have analyzed. But I very strongly suspect, that it is the reason your father wrote that letter. He pocketed the bottle with care and moved on. But I saw his face in the lamplight as he turned, and the look in his eyes was one I had learned to recognize over many years. The look of a man who has found the first thread and is already tracing it toward its source. We spent the rest of that day walking the town, or rather navigating the fog that had swallowed it. Poirot, who loathed damp physical exertion and uneven cobblestones in roughly equal measure, nonetheless insisted on seeing everything. The harbor with its fishing cobbles rocking at their moorings, the swing bridge that connected the east and west sides of the town, its iron structure disappearing into the white murk above. The jet shops on Church Street, where carved black jewelry gleamed in gas-lit windows like the eyes of ravens, and always the fog. It pressed against us, cold and intimate, as though the town were being slowly digested by some vast, white creature. Sounds were muffled and distorted. A voice from across the harbor sounded as though it came from a great distance, while the cry of a gull overhead was sharp enough to make one flinch. This fog, Poirot murmured, pulling his scarf tighter. It is not merely weather, Hastings. It is a condition. A town wrapped in fog is a town in which anyone can move unseen, in which the normal rules of observation do not apply. Consider, on the night Magnus Thorne died, this fog was present. A man could climb those steps, meet another person, and the entire exchange would be invisible to anyone standing 50 feet away. You think someone met him on the steps. I think someone lured him there. The question is how, and why, and what happened when they met. That evening, we dined at the hotel. The dining room was half empty. The fog had driven away the tourists, and the remaining guests had the subdued air of people marooned. Over a creditable fish pie. Poirot grudgingly admitted that Whitby understood fish, if nothing else. He outlined his thoughts. 3 children, 3 motives. Edgar, the businessman who fears his father's codicil will strip him of the business he has spent 20 years building. Miriam, the married daughter who believes there is more money than Edgar admits, and who may suspect her brother of cooking the books. Owen, the prodigal who returned home 6 months ago. Why? What brought him back? And what does he stand to gain? Or lose? I said. Précisément. The codicil is the key. Magnus Thorne added it 4 months ago. A provision to punish fraud, theft, or deception within the family. He would not add such a provision without cause. He suspected someone, and that someone, I believe, killed him before they could be exposed. But how? The doctor says heart failure. The doctor says heart failure because heart failure is what he expected to find. Magnus Thorne was 71 with a known cardiac condition. When such a man is found dead on a steep climb, the conclusion writes itself. But Poirot does not accept conclusions that write themselves. He writes his own. He dabbed his mustache with his napkin. Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall speak to Dr. Pemberton, and we shall learn why Magnus Thorne died with a smile on his face. Dr. Pemberton lived and practiced from a handsome stone house on the West Cliff, where the fog was marginally thinner but no less oppressive. He was a man of 65, stout, white-haired, with the bluff heartiness common to country physicians and the watchful eyes common to men who know more than they say. He received us in his consulting room, a comfortable cluttered space that smelled of carbolic soap and pipe tobacco, and offered us tea, which Poirot declined, and whiskey, which I accepted. Magnus Thorne, Pemberton said, settling into his chair. I've been his doctor for 30 years. Knew his wife before she died. Cancer, 12 years ago. I've treated all 3 children for everything from measles to melancholy. I know this family, Monsieur Poirot, and I tell you plainly, I don't believe any of them capable of murder. And yet Magnus himself believed otherwise. Magnus was anxious in his final months, more than anxious, tormented. He came to see me in July, complaining of insomnia, loss of appetite, a feeling of being watched. I prescribed a mild sedative and recommended rest. He refused. Said he couldn't rest until he'd settled a matter that had been weighing on him for years. Did he tell you what this matter was? No. He was always a private man. But he said something I found troubling. He said, Philip, if anything happens to me, don't take the easy answer. Look deeper. I asked what he meant. He wouldn't say. And now he's dead, and I'm wondering whether I should have pressed harder. Poirot studied the doctor with that penetrating gaze that could make even innocent men feel guilty. Dr. Pemberton, you certified the death as cardiac arrest. On what basis? The symptoms were consistent. History of angina, evidence of previous episodes, the physical strain of the climb, the cold, the damp. It was a textbook presentation. Did you conduct a thorough post-mortem examination? A pause. Pemberton shifted in his chair. Not a full post-mortem, no. There seemed no reason. The cause of death was apparent. And the peaceful expression? The smile? I've seen it before. The muscles relax. It doesn't necessarily signify anything. But it might signify something. Specifically, Dr. Pemberton, it might signify poisoning. The word landed with a thud. Pemberton set down his pipe. Poisoning? On what grounds? I found a bottle in Magnus Thorne's workbench, unlabeled, containing an amber liquid. I have not yet had it analyzed, but the scent, faintly bitter with an almost sweet undertone, is consistent with a tincture of digitalis. Foxglove extract. Pemberton was very still. Digitalis. You prescribed digitalis for Magnus's heart condition, did you not? Yes. In small doses. It strengthens the cardiac rhythm. And in large doses. In large doses, it stops the heart entirely. The symptoms of overdose can mimic natural cardiac arrest almost perfectly. Nausea, irregular heartbeat, then sudden failure. And the face, yes, the relaxation of facial muscles, the peaceful expression, that is indeed consistent with digitalis toxicity. So a man with a known heart condition, already taking digitalis in prescribed doses, could be killed by an overdose of the same substance, and the death would be attributed to natural causes. It's possible, yes, theoretically possible. Pemberton's face had gone grey. But who would, and how would they? The bottle I found was in his workshop, hidden beneath tools he used daily. If someone wished to administer an overdose, they need only have replaced his prescription with a stronger concentration, or added additional doses to his food or drink. Over time, the cumulative effect would weaken the heart further, until a final, larger dose, perhaps taken just before the climb, perhaps administered by another hand, would finish the work. My God! Pemberton passed a hand over his face. Are you saying I missed a murder? I am saying, Doctor, that you found what you expected to find. It is the most human of errors and the most dangerous. We see what we are prepared to see. It is Poirot's business to see what others overlook. I felt sorry for the man. He sat in his consulting room, surrounded by the instruments and certificates of a long and honorable career, and contemplated the possibility that his most fundamental professional judgment had been wrong. There will need to be an exhumation, Poirot said gently. A proper post-mortem with toxicological analysis. Inspector Hadley will arrange it. Pemberton nodded slowly. I won't oppose it. If I was wrong, I want to know. Magnus deserved better. As we left, Poirot paused on the doorstep, looking out into the fog. Hastings, a thought occurs. Yes, Dr. Pemberton prescribed digitalis for Magnus Thorne. Who filled the prescription? The local chemist, presumably. And who had access to Magnus's medicine? Who could have tampered with the dosage, substituted a stronger preparation, ensured that over a period of weeks, his heart was gradually, invisibly weakened? Anyone in the household? Owen was living in the house. Edgar visited regularly. Even Miriam and Thomas could have, or someone else entirely. Someone we have not yet considered. Come. I wish to visit the chemist. The chemist's shop, Whitfield and Son, dispensing chemists, established 1871, sat on Baxter Gate, a narrow street connecting the West Cliff to the harbour. The fog had thickened again, turning the gas lamps into smudges of yellow and reducing visibility to perhaps 30 feet. We found the shop by smell as much as sight. That distinctive blend of camphor, iodine, and something sweetly medicinal that marks chemists' shops the world over. Mr. Whitfield himself was behind the counter, a thin, anxious man in his 50s with the pallid complexion of someone who spent his days among bottles and prescriptions rather than fresh air. He knew Magnus Thorne's medical history intimately, as country chemists often do, and he was visibly distressed by Poirot's questions. I've been filling Magnus's prescriptions for 15 years, he said, adjusting and readjusting his spectacles. The digitalis preparation, tinctura digitalis, prepared to Dr. Pemberton's specification. 0.3 milliliters twice daily. I made it up myself, fresh each month. And the last batch? Collected 3 weeks ago by Owen Thorne. The name dropped into the quiet shop like a pebble into a well. Poirot and I exchanged a glance. Owen collected his father's medicine? He often did. Since he moved back to Church Street, he's been running errands for Magnus. Collecting prescriptions, posting letters, that sort of thing. I thought nothing of it. And is it possible, Mr. Whitfield, for a person with some knowledge of chemistry to prepare a stronger concentration of digitalis than what you provide? To, shall we say, enhance a prescription? Whitfield's spectacles went through another nervous adjustment. Digitalis is derived from foxglove, Digitalis purpurea. The plant grows wild on the moors above Whitby. Anyone with basic botanical knowledge could prepare a crude extract. It wouldn't be as precise as a pharmaceutical preparation, but it would be effective. Dangerously effective in higher concentrations. And foxglove. It is in bloom at this time of year? The leaves are still harvestable through autumn, yes. The active compounds, digitoxin and digoxin, are present in the leaves year-round. Poirot thanked him, and we stepped back into the fog. Owen, I said, He collected the medicine. He lives in the house. He had opportunity. Opportunity, yes. But motive, Hastings. What does Owen Thorne gain from his father's death? He inherits a third of the house and a share of the money. But the business goes to Edgar, and Owen has shown no interest in the jet trade. Quite the opposite. He left Whitby specifically to escape it. Then why did he come back? That is the question no one has yet answered satisfactorily. We were told it was 6 months ago. Let us find out why. The answer came not from Owen himself, but from an unexpected source. A woman named Nell Bradshaw, who ran a boarding house on Henrietta Street, and who, it transpired, had been romantically involved with Owen Thorne before his departure for London 15 years earlier. We found her through Inspector Hadley, who knew everyone in Whitby and their histories with the comprehensive familiarity of a man who has spent 30 years policing a small town. Mrs. Bradshaw was a handsome woman of 50, her face weathered by coastal air and the particular kind of endurance demanded by running a boarding house single-handedly. She received us with wary courtesy and spoke with a Yorkshire directness that I found refreshing. Owen came back because he was broke, she said, pouring tea with the efficient grace of someone who has poured 10,000 cups. His painting career was finished. He'd been living on credit in London for 2 years, running up debts he couldn't pay. He had nowhere else to go. And his relationship with his father? Complicated. Magnus loved Owen. He was always the favorite, the artistic one, the one who got away. But Owen's return was a humiliation for both of them. Magnus couldn't bear to see his son fail, and Owen couldn't bear to be pitied. They argued constantly. About what? About money, mostly. Owen wanted Magnus to sell some of the jet inventory, the rare pieces, the antique collections that have been in the family for generations. He said they were worth a fortune to collectors, and that sitting on them was foolish. Magnus refused. Said they were the family's heritage, not currency. And this argument, it was recent? Ongoing, but it reached a head about 5 weeks ago. Owen told Magnus he'd already approached a dealer in London, a man named Greaves, about selling certain pieces. Magnus was furious. He said Owen had gone behind his back, that it was tantamount to theft. 5 weeks ago, the codicil had been added 4 months ago, but the specific trigger for Magnus's fear, the event that prompted the letter, might have been more recent. If Owen had been caught trying to sell family assets without permission, and if the codicil specifically targeted fraud and deception within the family. Mrs. Bradshaw, Poirot said, do you believe Owen capable of killing his father? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, Owen is capable of many things, Monsieur Poirot. He's charming, and he's reckless, and he's desperate. But killing Magnus? No, I don't believe it. Owen loved his father, even when he hated him. That's the trouble with families, isn't it? Love and hatred grow from the same root. We left Mrs. Bradshaw and walked back through the fog toward the harbour. The tide was out, and the exposed riverbed gleamed with a dark organic sheen. The smell was powerful. Brine, seaweed, the ancient muck of a harbour that had been catching the sea's debris for centuries. Poirot, I said. If Owen didn't do it, and Edgar's alibi holds, then who? You forget Miriam and her husband, and you forget that we have not yet established how Magnus was induced to climb those steps in the middle of the night. That, Hastings, is the lock for which we have not yet found the key. The key, as it turned out, was waiting for us at the hotel. Inspector Hadley was in the hotel lobby, looking grim. He held a folded piece of paper. We've been going through Thorne's personal effects more carefully, he said. We found this in the lining of his coat, not the outer pocket. Stitched into the lining. He didn't want anyone to find it easily. The note was brief, written in a hand different from Magnus's own, a cramped, angular script on a scrap of paper torn from a larger sheet. If you want the truth about what Edgar has done, come to the top of the steps at 5. Come alone. Burn this note. It was unsigned. He didn't burn it, Hadley said. He hid it instead. Perhaps he didn't trust himself to remember the time and place. Perhaps he wanted evidence. Poirot studied the note with minute attention, holding it to the lamp, tilting it, examining the paper itself. "The handwriting," he said. "It is disguised. The letters are formed with deliberate awkwardness to prevent identification. But observe the downstrokes on the capital letters, particularly the E in Edgar. There is a leftward slant that is difficult to fake. This person is naturally left-handed." "Owen is left-handed," Hadley said. "So is Miriam," I added, remembering how she had held her teacup. "And Thomas Haldane writes with his right hand, but eats with his left," Poirot murmured. "I observed this at dinner. Ambidexterity, or a natural left-hander trained to write with the right. The note tells us that someone lured Magnus to the steps with the promise of exposing Edgar's misdeeds. This is important for two reasons. First, it means someone other than Edgar wrote this note. It would make no sense for Edgar to expose himself. And second, and more importantly, it means that Edgar may have actually done something. The bait in a trap works only if it is credible. Magnus believed this note because he already suspected Edgar of wrongdoing, the codicil targeting fraud within the family. It was aimed at Edgar. "Or Owen," I said, "the business with the dealer in London." "Or Owen. But the note specifically names Edgar. Someone wanted Magnus at the top of those steps, in the fog, at 5 in the morning, believing he was about to learn the truth about his eldest son. And instead of truth, he found death. We gathered the family once more, not in the parlor this time. The house on Church Street felt too claustrophobic, too saturated with the accumulated tensions of decades. Instead, Poirot requested the use of a room at the hotel, a private dining room on the first floor that overlooked the harbor, or would have overlooked it if the fog had not rendered the view into a wall of white. They came reluctantly, Edgar heavy and sullen, Miriam composed but watchful, Thomas precise and nervous, Owen restless, his painter's hands never still, and Dr. Pemberton, who had been asked to attend because, as Poirot put it, the medical evidence is central to everything. Inspector Hadley stood by the door, his notebook ready. Poirot did not begin with the note. He began, unexpectedly, with the fog. For 4 days now, this town has been swallowed by fog. The fishermen say it is unnatural. I do not believe in the supernatural, but I believe in symbolism. This fog is a mirror for what has happened in the Thorne family. For years, for decades, a fog of secrets, suspicions, and unspoken accusations has hung over this house. Magnus Thorne lived in it. He breathed it, and in the end, it killed him. He paused, letting the words settle. Magnus Thorne was not killed by his heart. He was killed by digitalis, an overdose of the very medication prescribed to treat his condition. The exhumation ordered by Inspector Hadley will confirm this, but I am certain. The bottle I found in his workshop contained a concentrated extract of foxglove, far stronger than any pharmaceutical preparation. Someone had been supplementing his prescribed doses for weeks, gradually weakening his heart, preparing the ground for a final, fatal dose. Edgar started to speak. Poirot raised a hand. On the night he died, Magnus received a note, hidden in his coat lining, instructing him to come to the top of the 199 steps at 5 in the morning. The note promised to reveal what Edgar had done to the family business. Magnus went. He climbed those steps in the fog, his already weakened heart laboring with each step, and at the top, or nearly at the top, his heart gave out. "So no one actually killed him directly," Owen said. "The climb killed him, the climb and his bad heart." "No, Monsieur Owen. The climb killed him because someone had spent weeks ensuring that his heart could not survive it. The note was the murder weapon. Not the hands, not the poison alone, but the note that sent a sick man up 199 steps in the cold and fog. The murderer did not need to be present. They merely needed to know that the climb itself would be fatal, because they had made it so. "A perfect murder," Miriam whispered. "Almost perfect, madame. Almost." But the note, Magnus did not burn it. He kept it. And the bottle. The murderer forgot to retrieve it from the workshop, perhaps assuming it would never be found among the tools and materials of a jet carver's bench. Small oversights, but Poirot, he notices the small things. He moved slowly around the table, and I recognized the change in his posture, the slight straightening, the lifted chin, the intensity that preceded the final revelation. Now, who wrote the note? Who prepared the foxglove extract? Who had the knowledge, the opportunity, and the motive to kill Magnus Thorne in this particular way? He stopped behind Miriam's chair. Edgar had the business motive. He feared the codicil. He knew his father suspected mismanagement, and I have confirmed, through examination of the workshop accounts, that Edgar has indeed been diverting funds from the jet business. Not enormous sums, but enough to constitute the fraud Magnus feared. Edgar went white. I can explain. You can explain it to Inspector Hadley. It is not the reason I mention it now. I mention it because your fraud, real though it is, was used as the bait in the note. Someone knew about your embezzlement, Edgar, and used it to manipulate your father. Owen had opportunity. Poirot continued, moving on. He lived in the house, collected the prescriptions, had daily access to his father's food and drink. And Owen, a painter, has knowledge of chemistry. The preparation of pigments requires understanding of solvents, extracts, plant-based compounds. Foxglove would not have been beyond his skills. Owen's restlessness had gone. He sat very still, his face taut. But Owen's motive is weak. He returns home broke, yes. But his share of the inheritance, even without the business, is sufficient to clear his debts. He gains nothing from murdering his father that patience would not have given him naturally. Poirot turned. "Which brings us to you, Madame Haldane. And to you, Monsieur." Miriam and Thomas sat side by side, and for the first time I noticed something I had missed before. The slight tension between them, the way Miriam's hand rested on the table an inch from Thomas's without touching, the way his eyes moved to her and away with the quickness of guilt. Thomas Haldane, a solicitor from Scarborough. Miriam's husband, a man who prepared the codicil to Magnus's will, at Magnus's personal instruction, bypassing the family solicitors. A man who therefore knew before anyone else about the provision targeting fraud. A man who would have understood, with a solicitor's precision, exactly what constituted a forfeitable offense, and who stood to benefit most if Edgar's share were redistributed. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. But more than this, Thomas Haldane, you are a careful man, a precise man. I have observed you at meals, at conversation, in the way you manage your wife's emotions. You are a man who plans. And you planned this. You discovered Edgar's embezzlement, perhaps through your legal contacts, perhaps through your own discreet inquiries into the family finances. You kept this information secret, waiting for the right moment. You prepared the foxglove extract, not in Whitby, too risky, in Scarborough, where foxglove grows abundantly in the gardens along the South Cliff. You brought it with you when you arrived 2 days before Magnus's death, disguised as a tonic or a herbal remedy among your wife's belongings. This is speculation, Thomas said, but his voice was thin, strained, the voice of a man whose carefully constructed defenses are crumbling. You supplemented Magnus's digitalis during your visits over the past months. You and Miriam have been to Whitby 4 times since July. I've confirmed this with the hotel register, gradually weakening his heart. And on the night of his death, you wrote the note. You slipped it under his bedroom door, knowing that Magnus, desperate to learn the truth about Edgar, would climb those steps regardless of the hour, the fog, or his health. The handwriting, Hadley said. Left-handed. Thomas Haldane is naturally left-handed, trained to write with his right. The disguised hand in the note betrays the leftward slant he cannot fully suppress, and the paper torn from a larger sheet. I have examined the notepad in your hotel room, Monsieur Haldane. The tear matches. Thomas stood, his chair scraped backwards. His face was the color of old parchment. You can't prove... The exhumation will prove the digitalis overdose. The bottle in the workshop will be matched to foxglove from the Scarborough Gardens. The soil composition is distinctive. The notepad in your hotel room matches the note. And your wife? Thomas looked at Miriam, and in that look, I saw the entire structure of their conspiracy collapse, because Miriam was weeping. Not the controlled, strategic tears of a guilty woman performing innocence. These were the tears of someone who has been carrying an unbearable weight and has just felt it lifted, painfully, violently, but finally. I didn't know, she said. I swear to you, I didn't know he was going to die. Thomas said the tonic would make father see reason, would make him more amenable. He said it was harmless. He said, Miriam, stop. Thomas's voice was sharp. No, I won't stop. I've been stopping for months, and a man is dead. My father is dead. She turned to Poirot, her face ravaged. Thomas told me the drops were a mild herbal sedative, something to calm father's anxiety, make him less paranoid about Edgar, less likely to rewrite the will again. I added them to father's evening cocoa when we visited. I thought I was helping him. You were poisoning him, Poirot said quietly. And Thomas knew it. The drops were not sedative. They were concentrated digitalis. Each dose weakened your father's heart further. Thomas used your love for your father, your desire to help him, as the instrument of his destruction. Miriam's sob was terrible. The sound of a woman understanding fully and finally what she had been made to do. Thomas said nothing. There was nothing to say. His careful, precise, solicitor's mind had constructed the perfect murder. One in which his wife administered the poison unknowingly, in which the victim killed himself by climbing a flight of steps, in which the fog concealed everything, and in which a pre-existing heart condition provided the perfect cover. He had needed only to write the note, to send Magnus up those steps one final time, and to wait. And he almost got away with it. Inspector Hadley stepped forward. The arrest was quiet, professional, almost anticlimactic. Thomas Haldane did not resist. He allowed the handcuffs to be applied with the same precision with which he had planned the murder. Neatly, correctly, without fuss. Miriam remained in her chair, weeping as her husband was led away. I've noticed in my years with Poirot that the resolution of a case does not bring the clean satisfaction one might expect. The truth, once revealed, does not heal. It merely clarifies. And clarity in matters of murder is rarely comfortable. Edgar Thorne was arrested the following day on charges of embezzlement from the family business. The amounts were not vast, a few £100 diverted over several years. But they were enough to explain Magnus's suspicions and the codicil that had set the tragedy in motion. Edgar accepted his arrest with the blunt resignation of a man who has been caught and knows it. Owen, cleared of suspicion, retreated to the third floor of the Church Street house and did not emerge for 2 days. When he finally appeared, he looked older but steadier, as though the crisis had burned away some of the restlessness that had defined him. I should have stayed, he told me, standing on the harbor wall and watching the fishing cobbles prepare for the morning tide. 15 years ago, when I left. If I'd stayed, perhaps none of this would have happened. You can't know that. No, but I can stay now. And Miriam. Miriam was the case's greatest tragedy. The Crown Prosecution Service would determine whether to charge her as an accessory, but Poirot, who had seen the genuine shock on her face when the truth emerged, expressed his opinion privately to Hadley that she had been manipulated, not complicit. She believed the drops were harmless, he said. Thomas used her as a weapon. turned her devotion to her father into the means of his destruction. It is the cruelest aspect of this entire affair. On the morning of our departure, something remarkable happened. The fog lifted. It happened gradually, beginning just after dawn, the white wall thinning, then breaking apart, then dissolving into wisps that scattered on a breeze coming in from the west. Within an hour, the town was revealed in sharp, bright detail. The red rooftops, the harbor glinting in sunshine, the abbey ruins on the headland standing clear against a sky of brilliant blue. I stood on the west cliff with Poirot, watching the transformation. Below us, the harbor came alive. Fishermen preparing their cobbles, the swing bridge opening to let a small cargo vessel through, the cry of gulls wheeling in the clean air. The fishermen were right, I said. The fog came when Magnus died, and now that the truth is out, it's gone. Poirot smiled. That small, particular smile he reserved for moments when sentiment and reason aligned. Coincidence, Hastings. Merely the weather. You don't believe in coincidence. I do not believe in the supernatural. But I believe, I have always believed, that the truth has a way of clearing the air. Magnus Thorne's death was hidden behind a fog of deception. His murderer counted on it. Counted on the assumption of natural causes, on the complacency of a town that had known him all his life and expected nothing sinister. Thomas Haldane weaponized familiarity itself. How did you know it was him? When did you first suspect? At dinner, on our first evening, I watched the way Thomas handled his cutlery, the left hand dominant, the right hand trained. A man who had disciplined himself to appear different from what he naturally was. Such a man, Hastings, is capable of sustained deception. It is not proof, of course, merely an observation, but it planted the seed. And the codicil? The codicil was the lock. Thomas prepared it. He knew its contents. He understood that if Edgar's embezzlement were discovered, Edgar's share would be forfeit and redistributed, and the largest beneficiary of that redistribution would be Miriam, his wife, his access to the Thorne fortune. So he exposed Edgar to trigger the codicil. He planned to. The note to Magnus, naming Edgar's fraud, was the first step. Magnus would confront Edgar. Edgar would be disinherited. Miriam's share would increase, and Thomas, careful, precise, invisible Thomas, would control the money through his wife, whom he had already accustomed to following his direction. But Magnus had to die first. Magnus had to die before the confrontation with Edgar, because a living Magnus might have investigated further, might have discovered not just Edgar's embezzlement, but Thomas's far more sinister manipulation. A dead Magnus, his death attributed to natural causes, would leave the codicil in place, the estate in probate, and Thomas in the perfect position to manage the aftermath. Monstrous. Calculated. Which is worse? Monsters act from impulse. Thomas Haldane acted from arithmetic. He sat in his solicitor's office in Scarborough and computed the value of a man's life against the value of his estate, and found the estate more compelling. That is not madness, Hastings. It is something colder. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the harbor below. A boy was fishing off the quay with a hand line, his concentration absolute, his world reduced to the taut string and the invisible promise beneath the water. The bottle in the workshop, I said. How did it get there? Thomas placed it there during a previous visit. He told Miriam it was a herbal supplement for Magnus's arthritis. Something to rub on his hands after long hours of carving. In fact, it was the reserve supply of foxglove extract, kept in case additional doses were needed. He forgot to retrieve it after Magnus's death. A small oversight, but it gave Poirot the first physical evidence. And the prescription from the chemist. Owen collecting it. A red herring. Owen collected the legitimate prescription. Thomas's poisoning was separate, supplemental, hidden, administered through Miriam's unwitting hand in the cocoa. The two substances, the prescribed digitalis and the illicit foxglove extract, would combine in Magnus's system to create a cumulative toxicity that no routine medical examination would distinguish from natural cardiac deterioration. Pemberton missed it. Pemberton saw what he was trained to see, an elderly man with a known heart condition, dead after physical exertion. The simplest explanation. Occam's razor. But Occam's razor, Hastings, is a tool for philosophers. It is not a tool for detectives. The detective must consider not just the simplest explanation, but the most human one. And humans, in my experience, are rarely simple. Our train was at 11. We walked down through the town one last time, past the jet shops where the black jewelry caught the new sunlight, past the swing bridge where the bell was ringing to signal an opening, past the foot of the 199 steps where Magnus Thorne had begun his final climb. Poirot paused there. He looked up at the steps, worn, ancient, disappearing into the steep ascent toward the abbey and the sky. 199, he murmured. A prime number, Hastings. It offends the sensibilities. I laughed, surprised, delighted. It was such a perfectly Poirot observation, delivered at such a perfectly incongruous moment, that for an instant the shadow of the case lifted entirely. Come, he said, turning toward the station. Let us leave Whitby to its sunlight and its kippers and its fishermen who believe in the intentions of fog. Hercule Poirot prefers London, where the fog is honest, yellow, obvious, and thoroughly democratic. It covers the innocent and the guilty with equal impartiality, and it has the decency to taste of coal. At the station, as we waited for the train, I saw a woman standing at the far end of the platform. It took me a moment to recognize her. Nell Bradshaw, the boarding-house keeper, Owen's former love. She stood watching the rails, her face turned toward the track as though expecting someone. But she was alone, and no train was coming from that direction. Poirot noticed her too. She mourns what might have been, he said softly. The love that left and returned too late. It is, perhaps, the truest mystery of all. Not why we kill, but why we fail to love when love is still possible. The train arrived. We boarded. Whitby receded behind us. The harbour, the cliffs, the abbey, the steps, shrinking into the distance until the entire town was a miniature, a toy set arranged on the edge of the North Sea. And above it, clear and bright, the sky held no trace of fog. As the moors rolled past the window, heather and stone and the occasional startled sheep, Poirot settled into his seat, adjusted his cuffs, and closed his eyes. Hastings, he said without opening them. Yes? When we return to London, I should like a bath. A long bath, with water that is precisely 40 degrees, and towels that are warm, and silence. Above all, silence. No more fog? No more fog, mon ami. No more steps. No more families who poison each other with slow patience and call it love. For one evening, let there be only the bath, the towel, and the certainty that all objects in Whitehaven mansions are arranged in their proper order. And tomorrow? One eye opened. The mustache twitched. Tomorrow, there will be another case. There is always another case, but tonight, even the little grey cells, they deserve their rest. He closed his eye. The train carried us south, and somewhere behind us, in a town that smelled of salt and jet and the memory of things buried deep, the sea continued its old, indifferent work against the cliffs and the steps. All 199 of them waited, as they had waited for centuries, for the next soul brave or foolish enough to climb them,